I'm divorcing him. My sister-in-law and I recently found out that my husband has been cheating on me with his ex-wife. I never suspected it because he was always so doting and loving. Our intimate life was great, we rarely ever argued, and in all the rare times we did we made it a point to always fix our issues instead of letting them build up. I truly thought our marriage was blissful. Even now I couldn't tell you why he chose this path, especially when he was the one that brought up the discussion of expanding our family. I've always been content with us and the kids he had from his previous marriage because I've never had the desire to have any of my own. My only real goal was to have a thriving career. I've never truly looked beyond that until he mentioned how he would like more kids. Around the same time I found out about my husband I had to go on a business trip, so I spent a majority of that time in a nauseous state, partly because I was drinking myself stupid alone in my hotel room and the other part was because I watched them going at it from our security cameras. That scumbag had switched them off for privacy, as I'm sure he does often, and they were taking full advantage of the fact that the kids and I were away right in front of my very eyes. It was truly sickening, but at the same time I couldn't turn it off. There were times his ex would try to convince him to break things off with me, but he'd always gotten angry at her for the idea. After I learned about their affair I couldn't understand why he'd gotten so angry about her suggestion when that option would have surely been better than cheating on me. When I finally had to come back home I was surprised by my sister-in-law and nephew waiting for me. At first she lectured me like any sister would for ignoring her when it came to the topic of my husband, then she surprised me by pulling out a business card for a private investigator. My sister-in-law was relieved at how well I took the news about the private investigator because she was afraid I was going to stay with her brother after all of this. We talked more about how I was feeling and how heartbreaking the news would be when I had to break the news to our kids that we'd be getting a divorce. After my sister-in-law was gone I realized I had to be done with the pity party. I had weeks to cry and what I needed now was to get my life in order, the sooner the better. So I got in touch with the private investigator and we met up for lunch in a small cafe. The man handed me a USB stick and had his laptop ready to show me, but I declined. I'd already seen enough and I didn't want to see any more. I thanked him for his time and shortly after my husband called me to say he would be home late. Normally I wouldn't have thought twice considering that we both have demanding jobs, but now I know he's most likely going to spend the night with his ex. This not only angered me more but it motivated me to get revenge. After the call I ended up arranging dinner with my close friend who's a family lawyer, telling her I'd be needing her services. I basically broke down the last few weeks of my life, including the memory stick I had gotten from the private investigator, evidence from our security camera footage, our prenup which had been locked away in our safe. I dreaded the end of the night. I could have gone to my parents' house, but that would open a ton of questions that I wasn't ready to answer, so instead I decided the best thing to do was to go back home as I waited for the divorce to be filed before making my next move. Update: I'm divorcing him. These past few weeks have been a painful blur. At first I was still in denial about it all. I guess a small part of me hoped the man I fell in love with was still there. I even played the doting wife for a little while, hoping that the guilt would build up inside of him and he'd stop his affair with his ex-wife or maybe come clean about the whole thing already. I just couldn't accept how a person could do this to someone they claim they love. I reached a breaking point when he had forgotten about my promotion because he knew how much of a big deal this was for me. He's known from the moment we met this was always one of my goals within my career. Even the kids had sent me flowers at work while he was too busy sleeping with his ex-wife to care about me or the fact I had made one of my biggest dreams come true. I got an Uber back to my parents' house after I had finished up at work because I had no desire to see my husband at that point and I just needed a break from this whole thing. After an hour or so of crying I ended up telling my parents everything I kept hidden from them. Things were silent after that with only my cries filling up the room. Sometime throughout that next morning I decided to break the news to my brothers and sisters-in-law. My sisters-in-law were caught between trying to calm down my brothers while also planning their own revenge methods. My mom only added fuel to the fire. Being a retired judge, she offered her judgment on how they could proceed without little to no punishment, leaving my dad to be the voice of reason. At the end of all the emotional turmoil, we decided that I would stop torturing myself and move back home temporarily as finding an apartment proved more difficult than I anticipated. We also decided that I would take some time off from work and begin to deal with my problems instead of using work as a distraction. My soon-to-be ex-husband was served divorce papers today at his workplace as my family was moving all my belongings back into my parents' house, while I had a rather long lunch at the in-laws' place along with my stepkids. To say it was awkward would have been an understatement. My mother-in-law and stepdaughter ended up crying a little. I told my stepkids about their father's affair, leaving out major details. They're not children, they're both 17 and nearly 18 a couple of months, so I felt that they deserved to know the truth about what their mother and father had done to me. I also haven't ruined their relationship with their father. They might feel anger and resentment for now, but he'll always be their father. They'll repair their relationship when it's time, just as I've seen them do before. I assured them at every turn this wasn't their fault and that they would be welcomed into my family without a second thought. I told them that if they still wanted me to be there for them I would. The three of us hugged each other tightly, with my stepson basically gripping my shirt as if I was going to disappear. I felt a few of his tears hit my shoulder, but he rushed out before I could even comfort him. When the kids left I told my in-laws all the details I had missed out, including who the affair partner was, and they were furious. They had never liked my husband's first wife and this just drove the knife further in. They couldn't stop apologizing, but I assured them this wasn't their fault. They were completely lost for words, and it wasn't long after that when I decided to take my leave with promises to keep in touch, but at that point they couldn't even look at me. They were too ashamed of their son's actions. I'm now single and trying to get my life back on track after all of this. I also know I have a lot of healing to do, but I know with the help of my support system everything's gonna be alright.